Today we're taking a deep dive into the New Thought movement. It's a philosophy that's, well, quietly shaped quite a bit, from modern self-help to even how we think about reality itself.
That's right. And its origins are, frankly, much older than you might guess, and often pretty misunderstood.
So our mission today is really to uncover the, let's call it the sacred origin story of New Thought. We'll trace its ancient spiritual roots, follow the, well, surprising journey of its kind of unassuming pioneer.
Yeah, the clockmaker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then see how it just flowered into this global force. You'll hear connections between, ancient mystics and this humble clockmaker.
And how those insights still resonate, right, in surprising ways, even today in your own life.
Absolutely.
What's really compelling here, I think, is how these seemingly totally separate traditions, across continents, centuries, they somehow converged to create something that feels both profoundly new but also deeply timeless. It's not just history we're looking at. It's more like the unfolding of this perennial wisdom.
Perennial wisdom.
Yeah, something that speaks to that fundamental human hunger for meaning, for agency.
Okay, let's unpack that. Our sources are suggesting New Thought didn't just, pop out of nowhere. It's described as a sacred remembering, weaving together much older wisdom. So where do we actually find these seeds, these ancient echoes?
Well, if you zoom out, look at the bigger picture, you really do see this kind of golden thread of truth running through millennia. Think about the whispers of the Kabbalists, for instance.
Okay.
Their concept of Ein Sof. Now, this isn't some distant God figure. It literally means the infinite, God without limits. The implication is huge. Nothing exists but this one divine reality.
All is God, basically.
Essentially, yes. And then you travel east, look at the Vedic seers. They declared Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, which is this powerful statement that everything, absolutely everything, is Brahman, the ultimate divine reality.
And the world we see.
Often called Maya, which doesn't necessarily mean it's just an illusion, like a fake thing, but more like a dynamic appearance, something shaped by consciousness.
Right, shaped by consciousness. That's key.
It is, and it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How do these incredibly diverse traditions arrive at such similar ideas?
Yeah.
You also find echoes in Hermetic wisdom, the core belief there. The universe is mental. And that really famous maxim, as above, so below, as within, so without.
That's everywhere now.
It is. And it's not just, nice poetry. It's treated as a statement about a mirrored reality, your inner world literally impacting your outer experience.
And it wasn't only these ancient, maybe more esoteric paths, right?
Yeah.
I mean, didn't early Christian mystics, the Gnostics maybe, also touch on this? The whole kingdom of God within idea.
Absolutely. Those seeking that direct spiritual knowing, often outside the main church structure, they definitely grasp this. So the core takeaway from all these different threads,
Yeah, what is it?
it's this perennial truth that seemed to resonate across cultures. Divinity isn't just out there, it actually indwells humanity. And this unseen world of thought, well, it precedes the visible form, this idea of a prisca theologia, an ancient common theology.
Right.
It gained a lot of ground in the 19th century. It really set the intellectual and spiritual stage for new thought to kind of reemerge in America.
So, okay, we have these ancient echoes, this universal thread running through time. But how did they become this, well, hopeful, practical philosophy in 19th century America specifically? What was going on then?
Well, the 1800s in America were just absolutely ripe for something new. You had rapid material progress, sure, but alongside that, a real kind of spiritual emptiness for many.
A disillusionment.
A big disillusionment, yeah, with this sort of rigid traditional church dogmas. And this created fertile ground for practices like mesmerism.
Right, mesmerism. Sort of like early hypnotism.
Kind of, yeah, it was huge back then, based on this idea of a universal magnetic fluid you could manipulate for healing. It was this whole age of magnetic miracles and ghostly whispers. People were actively seeking meaning in, well, psychology and the powers of the mind.
Okay, so this is where it gets really fascinating. Enter Phineas Quimby, just a humble clockmaker from Maine, but he was really sick with tuberculosis. Tell us about his turning point, because it seems like the linchpin.
It really was. His doctors, they'd offer him no cure, basically no hope. But then in 1838, something just happened. He went on this wild horseback ride, and afterwards, his pain, his weakness, it just mysteriously vanished.
Just like that.
Just like that. And this sparked this profound, life-changing question for him. Could the mind state actually affect the body state? That question ignited his whole lifelong quest to understand the connection between belief and experience.
Wow. So he didn't just accept it, he had to figure it out.
Exactly. He then started looking into animal magnetism, mesmerism. He was skeptical at first, apparently, but then he met this gifted young man, Lucius Berkmar, and their mesmeric tours where Berkmar would supposedly diagnose and heal people while in a trance. It really showed Quimby the incredible power of suggestion, the power of the mind. It blurred that line between science and what looked like mysticism.
So he went from skeptic to...
He went from showman, initially, to becoming this dedicated mystic healer by the late 1840s. He started focusing on what he saw as the true healing work.
Okay, so this is where Quimby's approach gets really revolutionary, isn't it? Because he wasn't using medicine, he wasn't doing surgery. How did he actually heal people? What was his method?
It was unique, almost psychological, really. He'd enter this kind of contemplative state and really tune into a patient's emotions, their underlying beliefs. His radical conclusion, which flew in the face of medical thinking then, was that illness was often rooted in wrong ideas. Things like fear, ignorance, these false beliefs people held about themselves or reality. He famously said, the body is the outward picture of the inward thought.
The outward picture of the inward thought. That's powerful.
Isn't it? So his diagnosis wasn't really physical. It was a diagnosis of their beliefs. There's this old Quimby flyer that says, if the patient admits he is correct, then his explanation is the cure.
The explanation is the cure.
Yeah. If he succeeds in correcting their error, he changes the fluids of the system and establishes the truth, or health. The truth is the cure. He was basically demesmerizing them from the trance of false belief, helping them wake up to a different reality.
So it wasn't about fixing the body directly, but about revealing a different reality to the patient, like a kind of spiritual reset, changing their inner story.
Precisely. He even called it the science of health, or sometimes the science of Christ. And it's fascinating how he saw Jesus not just as a religious figure, but as the ultimate healer who used this divine truth.
So truth itself was the medicine.
Exactly. He saw truth as this tangible, living force, something that could literally dissolve error thought in the mind, almost like light just eliminates darkness in a room. And for Quimby, God wasn't some distant judge. God was wisdom or love, this infinite intelligence that was always present. So to be cured was to be undeceived.
Undeceived. I like that.
Yeah, it meant literally shedding those false beliefs, seeing the truth of your inherent health, your connection to this divine wisdom, like waking from a bad dream. And this was so revolutionary because it implied healing wasn't some miracle for the lucky few.
It was accessible.
Accessible, a natural law of mind and spirit, not some exception depending on, divine favor.
And his success spread just by word of mouth.
Rapidly, yeah. Leading to these remarkable cures that really baffled the doctors of the day. He was, in a way, tapping into what we now study scientifically as the placebo effect, wasn't he? But purely from this spiritual and psychological angle.
So the profound takeaway here is it just that our internal story, our narrative, is way more powerful than we usually think?
Precisely. It's not just that a sugar pill can work, but that belief itself is this potent, transformative force. It can actually rewrite physical experience. Quimby got that intuitively, like a century before we had double-blind studies.
Amazing.
And crucially, among his most notable patients was a woman named Mary Patterson. Who would later become Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science. Now, there were controversies later about how much she relied on his work versus her own revelations.
Right, that's a whole other story.
It is. But she undeniably carried that Quimby spark far and wide. She laid the groundwork for this massive new movement, whether she fully credited him or not.
So Quimby passes away in 1866. But the sources say his death wasn't an end, it was actually a beginning. How did his ideas keep growing? How did they eventually coalesce into what we now call New Thought?
Well, like seeds, his ideas sprouted, and they blended really powerfully with other cultural currents that were happening at the time, especially transcendentalism.
Emerson and Thoreau and that crowd.
Exactly. Figures like Ralph Waldo Emerson, he was talking about the oversoul, the creative power of thought. It echoed Quimby's insights perfectly, even though they never actually met. But their ideas were resonating together in the public mind, preparing that intellectual soil, you could say.
So that brings us to the next chapter then. Who were the key people who took Quimby's initial spark and really fanned it into a proper movement?
Well, one really pivotal figure you have to mention is Emma Curtis Hopkins. She's often called the teacher of teachers.
Teacher of teachers, why?
Because her impact was just immense. She directly mentored so many of the future founders of the major New Thought denominations, people like the Fillmores of Unity, for example. She created this huge ripple effect of influence. Think of her as like the central hub of early New Thought leadership.
Okay, got it. So by the 1890s, this term New Thought becomes popular, even though, as you said, the core ideas weren't exactly new. So what was its unique flavor, its approach that really grabbed people?
I think one really compelling aspect was its incredible broad-minded embrace. These pioneers, they just saw no reason why God would speak only through a Moses or Paul and not through someone like Whitman or Emerson.
Oh, I like that.
Right. They valued spiritual wisdom from Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Confucianism just as much as the Bible. They created this powerful, really open-minded synthesis of the world's mystical teachings. It was remarkably inclusive for that era.
It sounds like the goal was sort of to take God out of the dusty church and put God into the living room, make spirituality super personal, super practical.
That's a great way to put it. It really did become the religion of healthy-mindedness, as the psychologist William James famously called it.
So besides Emma Curtis Hopkins, who are some of the other key figures, the organizations that popped up?
Absolutely. So beyond Hopkins, you had Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. They founded the Unity School of Christianity, which is still a massive movement today, really emphasizing prayer affirmation.
Unity, right.
Then there was Melinda Kramer and the Brooks sisters, who founded Divine Science. And eventually, these different burgeoning groups came together. They formed the International New Thought Alliance in 1914. That really solidified it as a coherent movement.
And what was their common message, their sort of shared gospel?
It was pretty clear and consistent. God is omnipresent. God is within you. Our mind isn't separate from, but fundamentally one with the creative mind of the universe, and crucially, the practical part. By changing our thoughts, we change our lives, we change our circumstances.
Change your thoughts, change your life.
That's the essence. Ernest Holmes, who founded Science of Mind later, put it really powerfully. The life of each of us is God. And this wasn't just abstract philosophy. It intersected beautifully with social reform movements at the time. It offered the sense that freedom is an inside job.
Inner transformation leads to outer change.
Exactly. That inner shift could empower people to create change in the world around them, too.
It really sounds like this vibrant, incredibly optimistic movement, giving people tangible, practical tools to, well, change their own lives by changing their mindset. Were there criticisms, though? Did people push back saying it was too simplistic, maybe? Or ignored real problem?
Oh, absolutely. That's a really crucial point. While the core message was incredibly empowering, yes, some did criticize it, they worried it might ignore genuine external hardships, or worse, imply that poverty or illness were just a matter of wrong thoughts.
Victim blaming, almost.
That was the concern, yeah. But the movement itself, at its best, always maintained a balance. It stressed that while thought is primary, you also needed compassionate action. You needed to understand the interplay between the inner and outer worlds. It's meant to be about realizing your power, not blaming people for their circumstances.
That's an important distinction. So this flowering of new thought really brought these ideas into the mainstream. But how did this sacred remembering keep evolving? How did it influence things even into the 20th and 21st centuries? Where do we see its DNA today?
Well, its DNA is kind of everywhere you look now, isn't it? It really permeates concepts like positive thinking, affirmations, but perhaps no single figure embodies that mystical lineage in the more modern era better than Neville Goddard.
Neville Goddard, right. Big name in manifestation circles now?
Huge. Though he wasn't formally part of a specific New Thought church, his teachings on the law of assumption, his bold, almost startling proclamation that imagination creates reality, that was pure New Thought essence, often delivered with this very blunt, direct power.
So Quimby said, the truth is the cure. Neville said, the feeling of the wish fulfilled is the key. Similar core idea.
Very similar. Both pointed directly towards our own astonishing creative authority, which leads us to that critical question, right? How did these really profound ideas get so widely popularized and maybe, in some ways, diluted for a mass audience?
Yeah, and that leads us right into the modern manifestation movement, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A phenomenon like The Secret back in 2006. Our sources call that a faint echo of earlier New Thought. What's the direct link there? And what was the impact of that huge popularization?
Well, The Secret basically repackaged those core New Thought concepts. the law of attraction, the idea that thoughts become things, it repackaged them for a global mass audience. It was, like you said, the 100-year-old secret behind the secret.
Yeah.
It made the esoteric seem accessible, which was powerful,
Mm-hmm.
but often, stripped of its deeper spiritual or mystical context. Even without the overt spiritual language, though, the metaphysical core was still there. Reality is malleable. It responds to mind and belief.
And the impact.
The impact was massive.
Yeah.
It brought these concepts to literally millions who'd never heard of New Thought or Quimby or Hopkins before. For better or worse, it sparked this huge new wave of interest in conscious creation.
So what's the path ahead then for this lineage? How does it stay relevant in our, crazy fast-paced world? How might it keep evolving?
I think the heart of New Thought, the truly sacred and mystical part, remains incredibly relevant. That emphasis on prayerful contemplation, on knowing the truth of your inherent divinity, regardless of what appearances might suggest, that message is like a healing balm for so many modern challenges. The anxiety, the overwhelm, it urges us to consult that inner truth, rather than just fixating on external fears all the time.
A different focus.
A radically different focus. And looking forward, you can really see new thought concepts merging even more deeply with cutting-edge science, can't you?
Like quantum physics or neuroscience.
Yes, exactly. As researchers explore how our thoughts might influence gene expression or how meditation literally impacts brain structure, it's almost like science is finally catching up with this intuitive ancient wisdom. That thread of truth just keeps connecting and harmonizing across different paths, spiritual and even scientific.
Wow. What an incredible journey we've traced. From those ancient mystics through that humble clockmaker's personal epiphany, all the way to best-selling books today.
It really is something.
This deep dive really shows how a sacred remembering, as the sources put it, can just profoundly impact individual lives and ripple out into global culture. It's about so much more than just thinking positive thoughts, isn't it?
So much more. It's about a deep, practical understanding of our own creative power.
Yeah.
And this story, it isn't just about historical figures back then. It's really a living testament to the enduring power of consciousness itself. For you, the listener, hearing this story, it might even feel like a kind of homecoming, like you're remembering something you already knew deep down.
That's a lovely thought. So here's maybe something for you to carry forward from this. What if you, listening right now, are inherently part of this very lineage? What if that same creative power that moved in Quimby, that inspired Emerson, that guided Hopkins, that illuminated Neville Goddard, what if it also moves, maybe subtly but powerfully, within you?
Yeah.
This sacred remembering keeps happening, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Every time you realize your thoughts are shaping your reality, every time you consciously choose hope instead of fear, every time you recognize your fundamental oneness with something greater.
Beautifully put. And as the New Thought tradition itself implies, if it had to have like a single core scripture for today, maybe it would close with verses something like this.
Okay.
O human, remember thy creative power. You are the child of the infinite. What you assume in faith shall be done unto you. Love one another, for each is the divine in disguise. Know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Wow. From those ancient echoes through the seeker from Maine to the flowering of thought, it feels like the same divine song just keeps playing on.
It does.
Listen closely. Maybe you can hear it in your own heartbeat. All is mind, all is God, all is possible. That feels like the profound origin and the boundless promise of New Thought. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.